The kitchens of orbital station Zenith gleamed with sterile precision, where alien elites dined on nutrient paste engineered to perfection. In the lowest galley, a human chef cracked eggs into a heated pan, and the daughter of the galaxy's most powerful diplomat wrinkled her nose in disgust at the yellow slime. But when the scent of butter and herbs drifted through the corridors, the little girl followed it like a moth to flame. What she tasted next would shatter everything her civilization believed about food, love, and what it means to feed someone with your own hands. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The kitchen existed in the forgotten spaces of orbital station Zenith, tucked beneath the grand dining halls where diplomats negotiated the fate of star systems. Steam rose from industrial vats, each one producing perfectly calibrated nutrient paste in shades of silver and blue. The air tasted metallic, recycled through filters that stripped away anything resembling flavor. And in the corner, near the disposal chutes, Ethan Cross stood at a single burner that predated the station's current management by 3 decades. His chef's coat had been white once. Now it carried the stains of 1,000 shifts, sauce and sweat, and the particular brown that comes from working too close to burning oil. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, chopping vegetables salvaged from Earth supply shipments that most aliens considered livestock feed. Beside him, Sophie hummed softly, her small fingers sorting through a crate of eggs, checking each one for cracks. The main kitchen staff ignored them. Tall, crystalline beings from Sector 7 glided past, their bodies chiming like wind through glass as they monitored paste production. A Thraxian supervisor, his carapace decorated with merit badges, sneered as he passed. Ethan's station. The human section, he called it, though only 2 humans worked here. The rest had taken easier jobs, scrubbing floors or managing waste reclamation, anything to avoid the mockery that came with cooking real food in a place that had declared such practices obsolete. Through the service window, Ethan could see into the lowest dining hall. Not the grand chamber where Xylith and her peers conducted their luminous negotiations, but the overflow room where junior staff and visiting merchants ate in functional silence. They scooped paste from bowls, absorbed nutrients efficiently, and returned to their duties within precisely measured intervals. No one lingered. No one laughed. Meals were fuel stops, nothing more. Sophie cracked an egg against the counter's edge, her technique improving with each shift. The yolk slid into a bowl, perfect and golden. An alien passing behind her made a gagging sound, loud enough to ensure she heard. "Yellow slime," he muttered to his companion. "Imagine putting that inside your body." Laughter followed, sharp as breaking glass. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd learned that silence served better than defense in a place where Earth's culinary traditions were viewed as quaint at best, disgusting at worst. He reached for butter, real butter smuggled in at shocking expense, and watched it melt across the heated pan. The scent bloomed like a secret. Sophie looked up at her father, and he nodded once. They had work to do. The grand dining hall existed 3 levels above the kitchen, a cathedral of bioluminescent crystal that pulsed with the rhythm of important conversations. Xylith sat at the central table, her green skin reflecting the chamber's soft light like polished jade. Her robes shifted colors with her mood, currently displaying the deep emerald of practiced patience. Across from her, ambassadors from 7 systems argued trade routes and resource allocations, their voices layered in a harmony only translators could parse. Beside her, Kira picked at her plate with obvious disgust. The purple child's skin had darkened to plum, a sign of deep dissatisfaction that every delegate could read. Her small fingers pushed the silver nutrient paste in circles, forming shapes that dissolved back into formless gel. She'd refused 3 different formulations already, each one engineered to appeal to her species' exact biochemical preferences. Xylith leaned close, her voice dropping to a frequency only her daughter could hear. "Kira, please. We've discussed this." The child's response came loud enough to stop conversations at nearby tables. "It tastes like nothing, tastes like the air, tastes like eating light." Her translator rendered the complaint in 15 languages simultaneously, and several ambassadors turned to watch. A server approached with a fourth option, this one shimmering gold and scented with synthesized compounds meant to trigger pleasure responses. Kira didn't even look at it. "I want food that smells like something," she said, her voice rising. "Real food. Not this." She pushed the plate away hard enough that it skidded across the table and stopped just before falling. Xylith's robes flashed red at the edges, embarrassment bleeding through diplomatic control. Around them, other diners pretended not to notice, but their attention pressed like weight. The delegate from Crystalia made a soft chiming sound that translated as sympathetic amusement. A Thraxian counselor clicked his mandibles in what might have been judgment or solidarity. Impossible to tell. "The nutrient paste is perfectly balanced," Xylith said, her voice tight. "It contains everything your body requires." Kira crossed her arms, her skin now dark as bruised fruit. "I don't want what my body requires. I want what smells good when you walk past it." The translator struggled with the concept, cycling through approximations. Want, desire, crave. None quite captured what the child meant. Xylith felt the attention of the entire hall, focusing on her failure to control a simple dining situation. She'd negotiated peace between warring species, restructured economic treaties that affected billions, but she couldn't convince her own daughter to eat. A Vayari merchant at the next table leaned over, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with superiority. "Perhaps the child needs discipline more than dining options," he suggested. His companion laughed, a sound like water over rocks. "Or perhaps she's inherited primitive cravings. I've heard some young ones fixate on archaic consumption methods." Kira stood suddenly, her chair scraping against crystal floor. "I'm going to find real food," she announced. Before Xylith could stop her, the child darted between tables toward the exit. The diplomat rose, robes flashing distress signals, and followed her daughter into corridors that led down, always down, toward the station's forgotten places. The corridors narrowed as Kira descended, the bioluminescent walls giving way to older lighting that flickered with mechanical uncertainty. She'd escaped her mother's grasp 2 levels back, slipping through a maintenance passage with the confidence of a child who'd explored every restricted area of the station during boring diplomatic sessions. Xylith's voice echoed behind her, calling her name in 3 different frequencies. But Kira kept moving. Then she smelled it. The scent stopped her mid-step. So unexpected, her translator attempted to categorize it and failed. Not synthesized. Not calibrated. Something cooking, actually cooking, with heat and transformation and chemistry that happened in real time rather than in a laboratory. Her nose wrinkled, then flared. Butter, though she had no word for it. Herbs she'd never encountered. And underneath, something primal that spoke to parts of her brain the nutrient paste never reached. She followed the smell like a thread pulling her forward. The corridor ended at a service entrance, and through the scratched window she could see the human section. The old kitchen, the place junior staff whispered about with derision, where the Earthman did primitive things with fire and raw ingredients that seemed almost violent in their directness. Ethan stood at his ancient burner, a pan in his hand, wrist rotating in small circles that kept 3 eggs moving in liquid butter. Sophie stood beside him, sprinkling something green from a small jar. Chives, grown in the station's forgotten hydroponics bay. The eggs had just begun to set at the edges, still liquid gold at the center, and the smell that rose from that pan carried more complexity than anything Kira had ever encountered. Her hands pressed against the window, leaving small purple prints on the glass. Inside, Ethan lifted the pan from heat, tilted it, and with a practiced flip sent the omelet folding over itself. It landed perfectly, steam rising like an offering. He slid it onto a chipped ceramic plate, the kind the station had replaced with self-sanitizing surfaces decades ago, and set it before his daughter. Sophie picked up a fork, real metal that required washing, and cut into the omelet. The inside remained soft, creamy, the color of sunlight filtered through clouds. She took a bite, and her face transformed with simple pleasure, the kind that came from being fed by someone who loved you. Kira's translator finally found a word. Hunger. Not the biological need for nutrients, but the deeper craving for something made with hands and intention and time. She didn't know she'd made a sound until Ethan looked up, his eyes finding hers through the window. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Human chef and alien child, separated by glass and culture and every assumption the galaxy had made about what food should be. Then Xylith appeared behind her daughter, breathing hard from the chase, her robes cycling through confusion as she, too, caught the scent drifting through the door's seal. "What is that?" Kira whispered, and her mother had no answer. Ethan set down his spatula, wiping his hands on his apron with the slow deliberation of a man making a decision he couldn't unmake. Sophie looked up at him. Fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes asking the question her voice didn't. Through the window, the purple child's face pressed closer to the glass, her skin brightening with something that looked like hope. Behind her, the green diplomat stood frozen, torn between protocol and the expression on her daughter's face. Xylith had negotiated in rooms where a single word could start wars, but she'd never seen Kira look at anything the way she looked at that pan. Ethan walked to the door. The kitchen's other staff had gone silent, watching. A Thraxian supervisor stepped forward, mandibles clicking warning. "Regulations prohibit feeding unscheduled species without proper documentation," he said. "Unknown biological reactions, contamination protocols, liability, matrices." The words came out like a recitation, hollow and rehearsed. Ethan ignored him. He opened the door, and the smell rolled out into the corridor like something alive. Kira stumbled forward, pulled by instinct older than civilization. Xylith's hand reached for her daughter's shoulder, then stopped, hovering in empty air. "One bite," Ethan said quietly. He held a fork with a small piece of omelet, steam still rising from its center. "That's all. If you don't like it, you don't have to finish." Kira looked at her mother. Xylith's robes cycled through a dozen colors, each one representing a different diplomatic calculation, risk assessment, cultural consideration. Then she saw her daughter's face again, saw the desperate want there, and something in her chest cracked like ice in spring. She nodded once. The child opened her mouth. Ethan placed the fork gently on her tongue, then withdrew, giving her space for whatever would happen next. The kitchen held its breath. Sophie set down her own fork, watching with the seriousness of someone who understood this moment mattered. Kira closed her mouth. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then her eyes went wide, pupils dilating so fast it looked painful. Her skin flashed through colors no one present had seen before, cycling from purple to violet to something close to white. Her knees buckled, and Xylith caught her, lowering them both to the floor. Tears streamed down the child's face. Not distressed tears, something else entirely. Her small body shook as she chewed slowly, as if afraid the taste would disappear. When she finally swallowed, she made a sound that the translator couldn't parse, something between laughter and sobbing. Again, she whispered, "Please." Again. Xylith stared at the human chef, her diplomatic mask completely shattered. "What did you do to her?" The question came out raw, almost accusatory, but underneath ran a thread of wonder. Ethan knelt beside them, his old knees protesting against the metal floor. "I just cooked her an egg," he said, "the way my grandmother taught me, with butter and time and attention. That's all." But they all knew it wasn't all. It was everything. News traveled through orbital station Zenith, the way fire travels through dead grass, fast and consuming. By the time Xylith carried Kira back to their quarters, the child still trembling and asking for more, 3 different news feeds had already picked up the story. A diplomat's daughter, moved to tears by primitive human food. The footage, captured by a maintenance drone, spread across 7 systems before the dinner hour ended. In the grand hall, the remaining delegates clustered around projection screens, watching the purple child's face transform again and again. The Vayari merchant who'd mocked her earlier zoomed in on her tears, analyzing them with scientific detachment. Involuntary emotional response, he announced. Clearly some form of chemical manipulation. Humans are known for their crude pharmaceutical interventions. The Crystalia ambassador chimed in agreement, her body resonating with certainty. No properly calibrated food should produce such a reaction. It suggests contamination, or perhaps deliberate adulteration. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. It was easier to believe in human trickery than to question centuries of nutritional optimization. But in the lower quarters, where staff ate their paste in silence, a different conversation began. A young Thraxian cook who'd watched through the kitchen window spoke quietly to his colleague. "Did you see his hands? The way he moved the pan? There was no deception there, only precision." In her quarters, Xylith held her daughter while Kira cried for reasons she couldn't articulate. The taste had awakened something in her, a longing for experiences she'd never known existed. "Why don't we eat like that?" she kept asking. "Why doesn't anyone cook for us?" Xylith had no answer. She'd been raised on optimized nutrition, every meal calculated to provide exact requirements without excess or waste. Efficient, logical. And suddenly, holding her weeping child, it felt like the cruelest thing her civilization had ever done. Her communication console lit up with incoming messages, the sector council demanding explanation, medical teams requesting biological scans of Kira to determine what contaminant had caused her reaction. 3 different security divisions wanting to quarantine the human kitchen. And underneath all of it, a single message from an old colleague, a xenoanthropologist who'd studied Earth cultures before they were deemed irrelevant. They called it comfort food. The message read, "Not because it was optimized, but because it was made with care. We calculated it out of our lives, thinking we were evolving past need. Perhaps we only evolved past remembering what need felt like." Kira had finally fallen asleep against her mother's chest, exhausted from emotions. Her body didn't know how to process. Xylith stroked her daughter's hair and made a decision that would cost her politically. She composed a message to the sector council, her words choosing themselves. "Request formal investigation into human culinary practices, not for contamination protocols, for cultural preservation assessment. We may have dismissed something of value." The message sent. Within minutes, her console exploded with responses, most of them outraged. But 3 delegates, ones with children of their own, sent private notes, asking the same question. Could we learn to cook like that? Vex arrived at the lower kitchen 2 days later, accompanied by reporters from 4 systems and a hovering array of recording drones. He stood 7 feet tall, his silver carapace polished to mirror brightness, and his 3 arms moved with the practiced grace of someone who'd won 15 galactic culinary competitions. Behind him, his assistants carried cases of molecular equipment, precision tools that could manipulate food at the atomic level. Ethan looked up from chopping onions, his eyes watering, and said nothing. Sophie moved closer to her father's side, her small hand finding his apron. "Ethan Cross," Vex announced, his voice amplified by the drones. "You stand accused of manipulating a diplomat's child through unregulated chemical compounds disguised as food. The Sector Council has granted me authority to challenge your methods publicly." He paused, mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile. "If you cannot prove your food superior to properly optimized nutrition, your kitchen will be permanently sealed." The small crowd that had gathered murmured. Thraxian supervisors nodded approval. But in the back, Ethan noticed others. Junior staff who'd heard the story. A maintenance worker who remembered his grandmother's cooking before the optimization programs. And Xylith, standing with Kira pressed against her side, the child's eyes locked on the human chef. "What kind of challenge?" Ethan asked quietly. Vex gestured, and his assistants began unpacking equipment. "Simple. We each prepare a meal. The assembly tastes both. They decide which achieves the true purpose of food, efficient nutrient delivery." His voice dripped with certainty. I will demonstrate that your primitive methods produce nothing that cannot be replicated and improved through proper science. Ethan wiped his hands on his apron, leaving streaks of onion and oil. And if I refuse, then you forfeit. Your kitchen closes today. Vex tilted his head. But you won't refuse. Humans are predictable that way. Pride over pragmatism. Sophie tugged her father's sleeve. Dad, she whispered, but Ethan shook his head gently. He'd known something like this was coming from the moment Kira had tasted that omelet. The station couldn't allow his small corner of old Earth to challenge centuries of optimization without demanding proof. I'll do it, he said. But not here. If you want a real demonstration, it happens in the Grand Hall, where everyone can see. Vex's assistants exchanged glances. The Grand Hall was reserved for diplomatic functions, not kitchen disputes. But Xylith stepped forward, her robes shifting to diplomatic gold. I support this location. The matter has become one of cultural significance. It deserves appropriate setting. Vex's mandibles clicked in irritation, but he couldn't refuse a diplomat's formal request without losing face. Tomorrow evening. Then, the Grand Hall. Bring your primitive tools and your butter. He said the last word like a curse. I'll bring science. The drones followed him out, already broadcasting the challenge across the station. Ethan looked down at Sophie, then at the small burner that had been his world. Guess we better practice, he said. The Grand Hall had been transformed into an arena. Tiered seating rose on all sides, packed with aliens from every system represented on the station. Recording drones hovered like mechanical birds, broadcasting to millions across the galaxy. At the center, 2 cooking stations faced each other, separated by 20 feet of polished crystal floor. Vex's station gleamed with technology. Molecular reconstructors, precision temperature arrays, holographic measurement tools that calculated nutrition to the individual molecule. His 3 arms moved in choreographed efficiency as he began his demonstration, explaining each step in the confident tone of someone who'd never lost. Ethan's station held a single portable burner, a cast-iron pan older than Sophie, and a wooden cutting board scarred by years of use. He'd brought eggs, butter, herbs, and a small bowl of salt. Nothing more. Sophie stood beside him, wearing a clean apron that nearly reached her ankles. The purpose of food, Vex announced, his voice carrying to every corner, is optimal nutrient delivery. Watch as I create a meal that provides exactly what the Kira's biology requires, calibrated to her genetic profile, superior in every measurable way to anything produced by heat and guesswork. His equipment hummed to life, breaking down base proteins and reassembling them into shimmering compounds. The drones zoomed closer, capturing every precise movement. The crowd leaned forward, impressed by the display of technological mastery. Ethan cracked an egg against the side of his pan. The sound seemed too simple, too quiet for the enormous hall. He showed Sophie how to tilt the shell, letting the white and yolk slide into the heated butter. Cooking isn't about perfection, he said softly, though the amplification carried his words throughout the space. It's about attention. He moved the pan in gentle circles, and Sophie added herbs with her small fingers, pinching and sprinkling the way he'd taught her. No measurements, no calculations. Just the knowledge passed from his grandmother to him, from him to his daughter, a chain of care that stretched back through generations. You cook for someone, Ethan continued, his voice steady. You're giving them time. Your time. Time you could spend doing anything else. But you chose to spend it making something that will nourish them, not just their body. Them. Vex laughed, a sound like metal scraping metal. Sentiment is not nutrition. Love does not provide protein matrices. His dish was nearly complete, a perfect sphere of optimized nutrition that glowed with gentle light, beautiful in its efficiency. Ethan folded the omelet with a practiced flip. It wasn't perfect. The edges had browned slightly more on one side, but it smelled like morning, like care, like someone waiting for you at a table. He slid it onto a simple plate and knelt beside it, Sophie kneeling with him. "This is what we're offering," he said to the assembly. "Not science. Not optimization. Just food made by hands that care whether you enjoy it. That's all we ever had. And maybe that's enough." The hall went silent, waiting for judgment. Xylith stood from her seat in the diplomatic tier, her robes cycling through colors too quickly to read. Kira clutched her hand, eyes fixed on the 2 plates below. The entire assembly turned to watch the diplomat descend the steps, each footfall echoing in the crystalline silence. She approached the center floor where both dishes waited. Vex's creation pulsed with bioluminescent perfection, its surface reflecting calculated light. Ethan's omelet sat steaming on chipped ceramic, imperfect and humble. The contrast seemed to prove Vex's point before anyone had tasted anything. "Protocol dictates I taste the optimized dish first," Xylith said, her voice formal, diplomatic. She lifted a utensil that Vex's assistant provided, took a precise portion of the glowing sphere, and placed it in her mouth. The assembly waited. She chewed, swallowed, and her face remained carefully neutral. "Nutritionally complete," she announced. "Efficient delivery of all required compounds. Well executed." Vex's mandibles spread in triumph. Several delegates began the gesture of approval, their version of applause. But Xylith hadn't moved toward her seat. She stood between the 2 dishes, her robes slowly settling into a deep emerald that signaled something the assembly hadn't expected. Vulnerability. "Now, the human's dish," she said quietly. She lifted a fork, Ethan's fork, the one he'd given Kira 2 days ago, cut a small piece of omelet, the egg still soft at its center, brought it to her mouth while millions watched across the galaxy. The taste stopped her. Not with tears like her daughter, but with something worse. Recognition. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they'd changed. The translator struggled with the expression on her face, cycling through approximations. Grief, loss, remembrance. "I need to tell you something," Xylith said, her voice barely amplified now, intimate despite the vast hall. "About my mother." The assembly stirred. Personal confession had no place in formal challenges. But no one interrupted. "She used to prepare food for me, before the optimization programs became mandatory. I was very young, maybe Kira's age. I don't remember what she made or how it tasted. Those memories were deemed inefficient, cleared during my first diplomatic training." Her hand trembled slightly around the fork. "But my body remembers. Something in me remembers being small and having someone spend time making something just for me." She looked at Vex, then at the assembly. "We didn't optimize food because it was better. We optimized it because we could. Because efficiency became our virtue and anything that couldn't be measured became worthless." Her voice strengthened. "But this, what I'm tasting now, it measures something we deleted from our equations. It measures whether someone cared enough to try." Kira had left her seat, running down to her mother. Xylith knelt, holding the fork out to her daughter. "We lost something, little one, something that can't be recalculated or synthesized." She looked up at Ethan. "And I don't know if we can ever get it back." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of species remembering. The challenge ended without formal verdict. Vex's protests dissolved into the larger conversation that erupted across the hall, delegates arguing in 17 languages about what they'd witnessed. But by morning, the verdict had delivered itself through action rather than decree. Ethan's kitchen had a line outside it. Not for food, though many waited hoping to taste what the diplomat had described. They came with questions that fumbled through translators, uncertain and shy. "How long does it take? Where do you buy butter? Can my species digest eggs? What if I've never cooked before?" Sophie helped her father manage the crowd, her small voice explaining procedures, while Ethan demonstrated basic techniques. A Thraxian supervisor who'd sneered at them weeks ago now stood watching Ethan crack eggs, his carapace tilted with intense concentration. "The shell breaks at the equator," Ethan explained. Gentle tap, then use your thumbs to open it. The yolk should stay whole. The supervisor tried, failed, tried again. His third egg cracked perfectly. The look on his face when that yolk slid intact into the bowl made Sophie smile despite herself. By afternoon, 3 more burners had been installed, salvaged from storage where they'd sat forgotten for decades. Species who'd never shared meals began cooking side by side, comparing techniques, laughing when butter splattered or herbs burned. The failures mattered as much as successes. Each mistake taught something that optimization had erased, the humble knowledge that learning takes time. Xylith arrived in the evening, Kira bouncing beside her with barely contained excitement. The diplomat had traded her formal robes for something simpler, though her bearing remained unmistakably official. I've requested a formal cooking lesson, she said to Ethan, for myself and my daughter. If you'll have us. Ethan set up a third burner. He showed them how to test the pan's heat with water drops, how to know when butter stopped foaming and became ready. Kira's hands were too small for the heavy pan, so Xylith held it while her daughter added ingredients, both of them learning together. Not too much heat, Ethan coached. Let it take its time. Rushing only burns the outside while leaving the inside raw. The metaphor wasn't lost on Xylith, who'd built a career on efficiency and speed. Their first omelet stuck to the pan, tore when they tried to fold it, emerged as scrambled eggs instead. Kira's face fell, but Ethan knelt beside her. Still good, he said. Still made with your hands. Still counts. They ate it together, imperfect and honest, and the child's tears this time came from pride. Word spread beyond the station. Cooking schools began forming on Thraxian vessels. Veari merchants started trading in cast iron and wooden spoons. A quiet revolution, measured in butter and eggs and time spent standing beside someone you love, teaching them something your hands know. Vex watched from the grand hall, his molecular equipment packed away. He'd won every competition the galaxy offered, but he'd never taught anyone what a mother teaching her daughter looked like. 6 months passed, measured not in station rotations but in omelets served, lessons taught, and families gathered around tables that had previously held only efficiency. The lower kitchen expanded into 3 adjacent spaces, each one humming with the sounds optimization had silenced. Laughter, sizzling butter, conversations that meandered without purpose beyond connection. Ethan's hair had grayed at the temples, but his hands remained steady. Sophie had grown tall enough to reach the stovetop without a stool, and she taught beginners now with patience that surprised even her father. The line outside their kitchen had become a community. Species who'd never spoken now sharing recipes and failures with equal enthusiasm. The grand hall transformed its entire eastern wing into what they called the learning kitchens. 20 stations, each equipped with basic tools and burners that required attention rather than automation. Xylith had pushed the proposal through council despite resistance. Her argument simple. We optimized away the ability to feed our own children. That deserves correction. She came every week, bringing Kira for lessons that had become ritual. The diplomat's hands had learned which heat turned butter golden, which sound meant onions had caramelized properly, which smell signaled bread had finished rising. She wasn't naturally talented, but her persistence matched her political will. Kira, however, had developed instinct. Her small purple hands moved through techniques like memory, as if her species had once known these things and only needed permission to remember. She helped teach younger children now, her voice patient, as she explained that broken yolk still tasted good, that imperfection was part of the process. One evening, after the kitchens had quieted and most students had returned to quarters, Xylith found Ethan cleaning his station with the same methodical care he brought to cooking. Sophie was already asleep in the back room, exhausted from a day of teaching. I wanted to thank you, Xylith said, though the words feel insufficient. She paused, choosing her next phrase carefully. You didn't just teach us to cook. You taught us what we'd lost when we stopped. Ethan dried his hands on a towel worn soft by use. I just made eggs, he said. Same as my grandmother taught me. Same as her grandmother taught her. That's what makes it matter. Xylith's robes had settled into warm amber, contentment her species rarely displayed. The chain, the passing down. We broke that chain thinking we were evolving past it. But some chains aren't restraints. Some chains are what hold us together. Through the kitchen window, they could see the station's corridors. Aliens walked past carrying ingredients, discussing meal plans, heading to cook for their families instead of visiting the paste dispensers. The change had been quiet but irreversible, spreading through culture like warmth through cold metal. Kira emerged from where she'd been practicing bread dough, flour dusting her purple cheeks. She held up a lumpy loaf, imperfect and beautiful. "Look what I made," she said, her voice bright with pride that no optimization could quantify. And in that moment, watching a child show her mother something she'd created with her own hands, Ethan understood what his grandmother had tried to teach him all along. Food was never just about eating. It was about being human enough to feed each other with love.